One of the hardest things I had to learn in my own healing journey is that not everyone wants the answer. And I don't mean that judgmentally, I mean that literally. For most of my life, I was obsessed with understanding people. I wanted to know why they did what they did, why they stayed in unhealthy situations, why they repeated the same patterns, why some people seem to be willing to look inwards while others seem to blame the world around them. And because I cared, I thought my job was to help them see what I saw. I thought if I could just explain the right way, use the right words, find the right example, maybe something would finally click. But over time, I realized something important. My first answer was usually enough. The rest wasn't about helping them understand. It was about me needing to be understood. When I look back now, I can see how often I would try to explain the same thing from 10 different angles. Not because I had more wisdom to offer, but because I was emotionally attached to the outcome. I wanted them to see what I saw. I wanted them to understand what I understood. And if they didn't, I'd keep trying. Different words, different angles, different examples, different perspectives. What I didn't realize at the time was that understanding isn't something you can give someone. It's something they have to be willing to seek. As I've reflected on this more deeply, I've realized that this pattern did not begin in adulthood. It began in childhood. I grew up surrounded by a lot of dysfunction, a lot of pain, a lot of behavior that didn't make sense to me. And I became fascinated with trying to understand it. Because understanding feels safer than feeling. If I could figure it out, maybe I could stop it. Maybe I could heal it. Maybe I could make sense of it. Maybe I could help the people I loved. So I became very good at asking questions, very good at noticing patterns, very good at searching beneath the behavior. But one thing I've learned is this: the behavior is rarely the real story. The behavior is usually the symptom. The real story lives underneath it. And the people who truly grow are the people willing to ask, what is this behavior protecting me from? What am I avoiding? What am I afraid to see? What responsibility am I refusing to take? Those questions change lives. Not because someone else gives you the answer, but because you're finally willing to ask the question. I've often wondered why my mind works the way it does. Why I seem driven to investigate everything. Why I constantly question assumptions. Why I can spend hours reflecting on a single interaction. And I think part of it comes from pain. But I also think part of it comes from curiosity. Because curiosity is what allowed me to survive. And eventually curiosity became the thing that helped me heal. Not certainty, not being right. Curiosity. The willingness to ask, what if there's something I haven't considered yet? The older I get, the more I realize that growth requires humility. Humility is what allows us to admit we don't know. Humility is what allows us to question our assumptions. Humility is what allows us to question the stories we've been telling ourselves for years. And without humility, healing becomes almost impossible. Because if we already know everything, there's nowhere left to grow. One thing I've learned is that the quality of our lives is determined by the quality of the questions we're willing to ask ourselves. Not the questions we ask other people. The questions we're willing to ask ourselves. Because healing begins the moment we stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this trying to teach me? For me, that's where everything started to change. And it's still changing every day.